Two motorcycles on a dark road. One running, one chasing. For 16 minutes, a young woman riding on the back of a scooter called out to the man pursuing her. She begged him to stop. She told him he was going to get someone killed. He didn't stop. The man on the larger motorcycle was her brother. And the person she was trying to protect, the person her brother had come to punish that night, was the person she loved. Maria Paola Gaglioni was 18 years old. She had finally left home. She had finally chosen her own life. She had 16 minutes left. There is a version of this story that tries to make it complicated. That frames what happened as a family dispute, a tragedy born of misunderstanding, a brother who simply went too far. But the facts don't support that version. What happened on a road in Caivano, Italy, in the early hours of September 12, 2020, was not a misunderstanding. It was the end of a 16-minute chase. It was a crash caused by deliberate, repeated, violent interference. And it was the death of an 18-year-old girl whose only crime was loving someone her family refused to accept. This is a story about family, control, and the price of intolerance. About what happens when a person's right to love is treated as a threat to be neutralized, rather than a life to be respected. My name is Claire Bennett, and this is Domestic True Crime. If this kind of careful, responsible storytelling matters to you, if you believe that every victim deserves more than a headline, your support keeps this channel going. A subscription, a like, a share, each one genuinely helps. Maria Paola Gaglioni was born in July 2002 in Caivano, a small municipality in the province of Naples, known, even before her death, for its difficult social conditions, high crime rates, and deeply entrenched traditional values. She was the youngest child of Franco and Pina Gaglioni, and she had one sibling, her brother Michele Antonio Gaglioni, 12 years her senior. That age gap shaped their relationship from the beginning. Michele had always treated Maria Paola less like a sister and more like a daughter, a protective instinct that, over time, would harden into something more controlling and, ultimately, more dangerous. The Gaglioni household was built on tradition, the kind where roles were clearly assigned, where sons carried the weight of the family's reputation, and daughters were expected to walk the path set out for them. Maria Paola grew up inside that structure. For years, she followed its rules. Then, at 15, she met Ciro Migliore. Ciro was 4 years older than Maria Paola. He had grown up in the same area, in similarly difficult circumstances. And from a young age he had known something about himself that the world around him was not prepared to accommodate. He had been assigned female at birth, but he was a man. At 15, he began the process of transition, a journey that required courage in any environment, and extraordinary courage in a conservative, close-knit community like Caivano. For Maria Paola, none of this was a barrier. What began as a friendship deepened into something genuine and durable. She loved Ciro. She supported him. She stood beside him through the difficulty of his transition, at a time when very few people in their world offered that kind of unconditional acceptance. But they were not living inside their love alone. They were living inside a family and a community that did not share it. The Gaglioni family's disapproval was immediate and total. In their eyes, Ciro was not a man. What Maria Paola felt for him was not love. It was a deviation, something to be corrected, contained, or ended. Under that weight, the couple made a decision familiar to many young people in impossible situations. They went underground. For nearly 3 years, Maria Paola and Ciro maintained their relationship in secret, hiding from the family that would have forced it to stop. Then, in the summer of 2020, Maria Paola turned 18, and something shifted. She decided she was done hiding. She confronted her family. She told them she was leaving. And on an otherwise ordinary day, she and Ciro moved out, taking shelter in a relative's home in a nearby town, about 10 kilometers from Caivano. They had no money, no stable employment, no plan beyond the immediate fact of being together without apology. For 23 days, they had that. The threats had not waited for Maria Paola to leave home. They had come earlier, On July 13, 2020, weeks before the couple moved out, Michelle had appeared at Ciro's home. He stood at the door and delivered a warning that Ciro would later describe to investigators with precision. Michelle told him that if he did not stay away from Maria Paola, he would cut off his head. He would kill him. Ciro did not report the threat. People in Caivano understood well the risk of escalating a confrontation with someone connected to the kind of networks the Gaglioni family was reportedly linked to. So he stayed silent. He absorbed it. And he stayed. Because Maria Paola stayed. When the couple finally left together in the weeks that followed, the Gaglioni family's response was not acceptance. It was surveillance. Michelle was watching. He knew the roads they traveled. He knew the routes between the relative's home and Caivano. He had been building towards something. On the night of September 11th, moving into the early hours of September 12, 2020, he acted on it. Cases like Maria Paola's take weeks of careful research and a great deal of care to tell accurately. If this channel's approach to storytelling means something to you, your support, a like, a comment, a share, helps make sure this work continues. It was around 1:30 in the morning when emergency services received a call reporting a road accident on a stretch of road outside Caivano. At the scene, 2 motorcycles told the beginning of the story. One, larger, more powerful, was resting upright on its side stand. The other, a small scooter, lay overturned in the tall grass at the edge of the road, half hidden by vegetation. A few meters away, on the ground, was Maria Paola. She was 18 years old. The fall from the scooter had thrown her against a concrete irrigation pipe at the roadside. The impact had caused a fatal injury to her throat. By the time emergency services arrived, she was gone. Ciro had been driving the scooter. He had sustained a fractured arm. Despite his injuries, he got up, ran to a nearby apartment building, and rang the intercom until someone answered. He told the residents there had been an accident. He asked for help. Strangers opened their door. They called the emergency services. He was taken to a clinic. In the initial hours, reporting described the incident as a traffic accident. A young woman, possibly forced off the road by another vehicle, that fled the scene. A tragic coincidence. The language of misfortune. But investigators were already looking at something that didn't fit that language. 2 motorcycles, one parked cleanly on its stand, one lying in the grass, and a man who had been beaten after the crash, bruises that had nothing to do with the fall. This had not been an accident. It had been a chase, and the person who had organized that chase, who had waited that night on the road he knew they would travel, was Maria Paola's brother, Michelle. What the investigation reconstructed was this. Michelle had intercepted Maria Paola and Ciro on their route back to the relative's home. On his larger, more powerful motorcycle, he had pulled in behind them and then in front, swerving aggressively across their path. Again and again, he cut them off. At one point, he lashed out with his foot, kicking at the scooter while it was in motion. Maria Paola was on the back of that scooter. She called out to her brother. She begged him to stop. She told him what he was doing was going to get them killed. He continued. For 16 minutes, the pursuit went on. Then, on a sharp bend in the road, Michelle delivered another kick from the left side. Ciro lost control. The scooter skidded off the road and into the brush. When Michelle caught up, he found Ciro on the ground with a broken arm. He attacked him anyway, punching, kicking, continuing the violence that the crash had briefly interrupted. Maria Paola lay a few meters away, motionless. It was only when Michelle looked at his sister and realized she was not moving that the assault stopped. He called their parents. He called emergency services. She was already gone. Michelle Gaglioni was 30 years old. He was married. He had children of his own. He was arrested shortly after the crash. His first words to police were a partial confession. He said he had done something stupid. He acknowledged that his intention had been to punish his sister. Not to kill her, he insisted, but to teach her a lesson. To make her understand that being with someone like Ciro was not something he would allow. He blamed Ciro. He said Ciro had corrupted his sister, had led her away from the life she was supposed to have. He said Maria Paola had always been, in his words, normal, and he denied direct responsibility for the crash. He claimed he had been further back on the road when the scooter went down, that it hadn't been his doing. The forensic evidence did not support that version. On Ciro's body, investigators found bruising and marks that matched precisely with the tread pattern of Michelle's motorcycle boots, confirmation that Ciro had been struck after the crash, exactly as he had described. Security camera footage from the area captured both motorcycles traveling in close, dangerous proximity. Witnesses from the neighborhood came forward to confirm that Michelle's threats and hostility toward the couple had not begun that night. They predated it by months. The July 13th threat, the one Ciro had never reported, the one where Michelle had told him he would cut off his head, was now part of the official record. The initial charges against Michelle, causing injury and causing death as a result of another crime, were escalated as the evidence accumulated. He was charged with manslaughter and aggravated private violence, with homophobia listed as an aggravating factor. The judge reviewing pretrial detention confirmed 3 things as established. Michelle had deliberately gone out that night to intercept the couple. He had kicked the scooter from the side while it was in motion, a fact supported by both witness accounts and camera footage. And after the crash, he had physically attacked Ciro. The court characterized his behavior as demonstrating not only rage, but a high level of social danger. His detention was upheld. From his hospital bed, still in a wheelchair with his arm in a cast, Ciro gave a statement to journalists. He said that in some way, despite everything, they had already won. Because they had loved each other openly. Because Maria Paola had known she was loved. He recalled what some of her relatives had said in the past, that they would rather see her dead than with someone like him. That sentence would stay in the public record long after the trial ended. The Gaglioni family, for their part, retreated. Maria Paola's parents avoided direct media engagement, communicating instead through a lawyer and their local parish priest. In a published open letter, they framed their silence as mourning with dignity. Their position: Michelle had only been trying to bring his sister home. Their opposition to Ciro had never been about prejudice, they said. It had been about his character, his lifestyle, his associates. Ciro's mother saw it differently. She spoke publicly and without restraint. She accused the Gaglioni family of having set a deliberate trap, of having feigned a desire for peace in order to lure the couple back into their reach. She accused Maria Paola's mother specifically of having made threats against both young people and of repeatedly using language that denied Ciro's identity entirely. 2 families, 2 versions, 1 dead girl. On September 15, 2020, Caivano gathered to say goodbye to Maria Paola. The funeral was attended by hundreds. White balloons were released. Doves were sent into the sky. Applause filled the church. Through their lawyer, the Gaglioni family extended an open invitation to the LGBTQ community. And yet, the family refused to allow Ciro to attend. The man Maria Paola had chosen, the person she had hidden for 3 years, and then finally chosen publicly. He was not permitted to say goodbye to her. He marked the day from his hospital room. It would have been their 3rd anniversary. He shared a message on social media about the love they had shared, and the pride he felt in having lived it, however briefly, and however painfully it had ended. Across Italy, the response to Maria Paola's death was vast and genuine. Her story was compared in the press and on social media to Romeo and Juliet, a framing that captured the tragedy but also risked aestheticizing it. What people felt, beyond the romance of the analogy, was anger. Rainbow flags appeared at the crash site alongside flowers and candles. The hashtag bearing her name spread. Young people who had never met her recognized something in her story that they had either lived or feared. The case placed immediate pressure on the Italian parliament to advance the Zan law, legislation designed to establish protections against hate crimes based on sexual orientation and gender identity. The law had been stalled for years, Maria Paola's death became part of the argument for why delay had consequences. On September 17th, Michel wrote a letter from prison. He described the loss of his sister as though a part of his heart had been destroyed. He said he would never forgive himself. He said he had never intended for any of this to happen. In the same letter, he described Ciro as someone involved with dangerous people. He was shifting the frame again, even from a cell. Then, in February 2021, Ciro was arrested. He was swept up in a large anti-drug operation across several Italian regions, charged alongside more than 20 others with involvement in a drug trafficking network. The charges were serious: narcotics distribution, weapons offenses, theft, arson, and facilitating the escape of a person under house arrest. The crimes alleged predated his relationship with Maria Paola, occurring in 2018 before he had formally begun his gender transition. Despite this, he was placed in a women's prison, a decision that triggered its own wave of public controversy. His defense argued that those years were behind him, that Maria Paola had been part of a genuine turning point. The court and the public were left to hold two things at once: a young man who had been the victim of a violent hate crime, and a young man who had also made serious choices of his own. Neither of those things canceled the other. Neither brought Maria Paola back. The trial of Michel Gaglioni began in May 2022. In April of that year, while awaiting trial, he had been granted house arrest with an electronic monitoring bracelet, citing good behavior in custody and no prior criminal record. Prosecutors sought a sentence of 22 years. Their argument was that Michel's actions had constituted deliberate killing, the murder of his sister, and the attempted murder of Ciro Migliore. They framed the homophobia charge as an aggravating factor that should be reflected in the sentence. The defense maintained, consistently, that Michel had never intended to cause Maria Paola's death, that he had only wanted to stop her. As the trial unfolded, the homophobia charge was dropped. The court noted that Ciro's criminal charges had become part of the conversation, and the Gaglioni family's position that their opposition had been about Ciro's lifestyle rather than his gender identity gained some traction in the absence of that aggravating factor. The judges weighed Michel's clean prior record and his conduct while in custody. They reclassified the primary charge, ruling out voluntary homicide. They found him guilty instead of manslaughter and aggravated assault. The sentence: 9 years and 6 months. Outside the courthouse, Ciro's lawyer spoke to journalists. He said the real tragedy of the case was not only Maria Paola's death. It was the destruction of a love that had managed to survive poverty, rejection, and years of concealment, only to be ended by violence on a dark road. Michel's defense appealed the verdict. In June 2024, the appeal was rejected. The 9-year, 6-month sentence was confirmed. Maria Paola Gaglioni was 18 years old. She had spent 3 years loving someone in secret because the alternative, loving him openly, carried consequences she was not yet equipped to manage. When she finally decided she was done hiding, she had 23 days. What her case makes visible is a form of family violence that is sometimes harder to name than others: the violence of refusal. The refusal to accept who someone is, the refusal to accept who they love, and the conviction, held by some with complete sincerity, that this refusal is not cruelty but protection. Michel told police he was protecting his family's honor. He told the court he had loved his sister like a daughter. He may have believed both of those things, and both of them led him to chase her down a road at 1:30 in the morning until she was dead. That is what it means when love is conditional on compliance. The complications in this case: Ciro's subsequent arrest, the questions about his past, the family's attempt to reframe the issue as lifestyle rather than identity, are real. They are worth acknowledging, but they do not change what happened on that road. A young woman begged her brother to stop. He didn't stop. She died. The rest is context. At the crash site, people left flowers and rainbow flags and candles. They wrote her name. They lit something to say that her love had existed and had mattered, and that its ending was not acceptable. That is the least a person deserves. Maria Paola Gaglioni wanted one thing that should have been ordinary: She wanted to love the person she chose, in daylight, without apology. She spent 3 years waiting for that to be possible. She had 23 days of it. Ciro described what they had as a victory. Not in the way the word is usually used, but in the sense that they had lived their love openly, even briefly, even against everything. He said that counted for something. Michele Gaglioni will serve his sentence. The appeal has been exhausted. The case is closed in legal terms. But the questions it raised, about honor, about control, about what families are permitted to do in the name of love, remain open. In Italy, and far beyond it, these stories take real time and real care to research and tell properly. If domestic true crime is something you find worthwhile, if you believe that victims like Maria Paola deserve this kind of attention, please support the channel. Subscribe, leave a comment, share this with someone who should hear it. It makes a genuine difference to what this channel can do. She was 18. She had been loved. She had loved in return. This is domestic true crime, and this case should have never happened.